Today, we're taking a deep dive into the deadliest mass shooting in modern Canadian history, the 2020 Nova Scotia attacks. We're going to break down what happened, who was behind it, and the huge changes that followed this national tragedy. So let's set the scene. We're in the beautiful coastal province of Nova Scotia. But on April 18th and 19th of 2020, a truly horrific series of events unfolded across these small, rural communities, and it left the entire country just completely in shock. 22. That's the number you need to remember. 22 innocent people, including a police officer and a pregnant woman, lost their lives. They were neighbors, they were parents, friends, and their loss is really at the heart of this entire story. Now, to really understand the sheer scope of this, you have to look at the timeline. The violence wasn't contained, it spanned 13 absolutely terrifying hours. It all kicked off in a small, quiet community called Portapique. The attacker first assaulted his partner, who incredibly managed to escape. He then started setting homes on fire and shooting people he came across. This was just the beginning of a very long night of terror. And this is a key point. This wasn't an attack in just one spot. The perpetrator was moving across the province, covering a huge distance through communities like Wentworth, Dubert, and Shubenacadie. In the end, he left a trail of 16 separate crime scenes. When you look at this timeline, the chaos and the sheer length of the manhunt really become clear. The first 911 calls came in just after 10 p.m., but look at that gap. It wasn't until the next morning, over 12 hours later, that police finally let the public know that the gunman was disguised as an officer. By that time, sadly, RCMP Constable Heidi Stevenson had already been killed, right before the whole chase finally ended at a gas station in Enfield. So how could this possibly happen? To even begin to understand, we need to look at the man behind the attacks. Who was he, and how did he pull this off? The gunman was a 51-year-old named Gabriel Wortman. Now, by trade, he was a denturist. He owned his own clinic in Dartmouth. But behind that public face was a much darker story, one that included reports of domestic violence, illegal guns, and what people who knew him called really paranoid and controlling behavior. And he was heavily armed. We're talking 5 firearms. 2 semi-automatic rifles, and 3 semi-automatic handguns. An arsenal like this is incredibly rare in Canada, and it's what allowed him to cause so much devastation so quickly. So the big question is, how did he even get these weapons? Well, Wortman didn't have a firearms license, so just possessing them was illegal from the get-go. Investigations later found that 3 of the guns had been smuggled in from the United States, and the last handgun, he stole it from Constable Stevenson after he killed her. And this is where it gets truly chilling. His level of planning was just meticulous. Wortman's most effective tool was his disguise. He had actually bought old decommissioned police cars at auctions and then turned one into a nearly perfect replica of an RCMP cruiser. When you combine that with the authentic police uniforms he had, he was able to move around for hours completely undetected, fooling both the public and law enforcement. The attacks themselves were one part of this tragedy. But the official response? Well, that became a whole other part. In the days and weeks that followed, the actions of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police came under some really intense scrutiny. This became the single most urgent question for the victims' families and for a public that was just horrified. You've got an active shooter on the loose for 13 hours impersonating a police officer. So why was a direct province-wide emergency alert never sent to people's phones? The difference in communication was just stark. The RCMP was relying on social media, things like Twitter and Facebook, to get warnings out. But what the public was expecting was a message from the Alert Ready system. You know, the same system that's used for Amber Alerts or severe weather, that blasts a loud, impossible-to-miss warning to every single mobile phone, TV, and radio in the area. That alert never, ever came. A massive public inquiry, known as the Mass Casualty Commission, was eventually launched, and its final report was absolutely damning. It concluded that the RCMP's response was plagued by systemic failures, terrible communication, and a total failure to warn the public properly and on time. You know, the impact of those 13 hours continues to ripple across Canada. It sparked profound grief, some really difficult questions, and a powerful push for major reform. All across the country, Canadians were just heartbroken. You saw memorials like this one spring up to honor the 22 lives that were tragically taken. The whole event brought this wave of national grief and a real shared feeling that something had to change. Because of the kinds of weapons he used, Canada's gun laws were immediately put under a microscope. The tragedy became this powerful catalyst that just fast-tracked a debate that had been simmering for a long time about banning certain types of firearms. Just days after the attacks, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau really captured the government's position with these words. He was framing the firearms used not as something for sport, but as weapons of war. And that really set the stage for a huge policy shift. And the government acted incredibly fast. On May 1st, less than 2 weeks after the shooting, an executive order banned over 1,500 models of what they called assault-style firearms. This included the Ruger Mini 14, one of the actual rifles used in the attack. It basically made it illegal to buy, sell, or even transport these weapons in Canada overnight. The attacks in Nova Scotia left a permanent scar on the country. The legacy of those 22 victims now really rests in the ongoing efforts for reform, in policing and how we handle emergency communications, and in our firearm laws. So the central question that we're all still asking is, what lessons must we truly learn to make sure a tragedy like this can never, ever happen again?